Why are there 20 cars at my house?
The owner never comes home before 6. We have plenty of time.
Every second is now evidence.
She stole my home. She never expected the cameras. Or the police.
I bought that lake house for one reason: peace. After 20 years of overtime, a painful divorce, and more sleepless nights than I could count, I finally owned one place where nobody could tell me how to live. 7 days later, HOA Karen unlocked my front door with her own key. Slow cinematic drone descending over the calm lake toward Daniel standing on the dock, gentle morning mist, realistic water reflections, subtle breeze moving trees, emotional documentary opening, movie-quality camera movement. Community meeting starts in 5 minutes. Please find your seats. What meeting? They weren't robbing me. They were using my house as the HOA headquarters. And they acted like I was the one interrupting them. You'll understand eventually. She was wrong. 3 weeks later, I welded every door shut, while every single one of them was still inside. 6 years earlier, my life looked nothing like this. A divorce had emptied my savings, my apartment overlooked nothing but cracked asphalt, and every paycheck disappeared before the month was over. The lake house wasn't just another property, it was my second chance. For nearly 22 years, I repaired industrial machines during the day, and repaired my own future at night. Every overtime paycheck went into one account, one dream, one house beside a quiet lake. Then I found it. A modest 2-story lake house, an aging wooden dock, oak trees older than the town itself, and silence. The kind of silence money almost never buys. The previous owner, Walter Green, paused before handing me the keys. He smiled, then quietly said something I wouldn't understand until much later. I laughed. I thought he meant noisy neighbors. I had no idea. He was warning me about Karen Mitchell. Exactly 7 days after moving in, someone knocked on my front door. Not to welcome me, to measure me. I'm Karen Mitchell, president of the Homeowners Association. She said it, like she expected the title alone to unlock every door. She wasn't looking at me. She was studying my house. Every hallway, every room, every window. Almost like she was inspecting something she already believed belonged to her. Do you travel often? Do you work late? Will you be living here alone? At the time, they sounded like friendly questions. Now, I know they were surveillance. Within days, the letters started arriving. One complained about my porch light, about my trash can, then another, about grass that was supposedly half an inch too tall. I hadn't moved into a neighborhood. I'd walked into Karen's kingdom. I tried to ignore it. Maybe Karen treated every new homeowner this way. Maybe once she realized I wasn't interested in neighborhood politics, she'd move on. I couldn't have been more wrong. Karen never came empty-handed. Sometimes she carried a clipboard, sometimes a folder, sometimes a tiny dog that strangely disappeared after the first week. But every visit had the same purpose: watching me. She somehow knew exactly when I left for work, when I came home, and which weekends I stayed away. Nobody had told her. Yet somehow, she always knew. Looking back, she wasn't making conversation. She was collecting data. Every answer I gave her became another piece of her plan. Then, everything changed. One Thursday, I finished work 2 hours early. That single decision destroyed Karen's entire operation. As I turned into my driveway, I slammed on the brakes. 12 cars, parked outside my house. None of them belonged to me. Music drifted through the open windows. People were laughing. Someone was giving a presentation. For one insane second, I honestly thought I'd driven to the wrong address. I checked the mailbox. My house number. My dock.my truck. No. This was definitely my home. The front door was unlocked. What I saw inside didn't make sense. Rows of folding chairs, a projector, coffee, pastries, and nearly 20 strangers inside my living room. "You're home early." She smiled, like I was interrupting her meeting. Inside my own house, nobody apologized. Nobody looked embarrassed. Most of them simply stared at me, waiting for me to leave. Everyone needs to leave now. The previous owner always let us use this house. I didn't. That was the exact moment I stopped seeing Karen Mitchell as an annoying neighbor, and started seeing her for what she really was. A woman who honestly believed other people's homes belonged to her. I expected an argument, maybe a few angry words. Instead, Karen reached into her designer handbag, and calmly pulled out her phone. She wasn't calling the homeowners. She was calling the police. 5 minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled into my driveway. For a brief moment, I actually felt relieved. Surely, they'd remove everyone trespassing inside my house. "Sir, Karen tells us you're disrupting a scheduled HOA meeting. I'm disrupting a meeting inside my living room. Karen smiled, not because she was winning, because she'd done this before. She knew exactly which words sounded reasonable, and which lies sounded believable. The previous owner always allowed community meetings. We assumed nothing had changed. One officer looked at me, then at Karen, then back at the crowded living room. Legally, the situation wasn't nearly as simple as I thought. Mr. Walker, we recommend asking everyone to leave peacefully today, then resolving ownership issues through civil court. One by one, they finally walked out, laughing, talking, carrying coffee cups that belonged to me. I stepped back inside. Nothing had been stolen, nothing had been broken, but somehow, the house no longer felt like mine. Most people would have changed the locks. I did something else, something Karen would never expect. The next morning, I drove straight to an electronics store. Not alarms, not stronger locks, hidden cameras, 8 of them. Every entrance, every hallway, every room Karen had admired, now had a witness. I wasn't trying to catch a thief. I was waiting to discover just how comfortable Karen Mitchell had become inside someone else's home. For 3 days, nothing happened. The cameras recorded empty rooms, sunlight crossing hardwood floors, and silence. I almost convinced myself Karen had finally given up. Then, Wednesday afternoon, 12:43 p.m. One notification changed everything. Front door motion detected. I opened the live feed, expecting a delivery driver. Instead, I watched Karen walk calmly toward my front door. She wasn't carrying an invitation. She was carrying a key. She never knocked. She never looked around. She simply unlocked my front door, like she'd done it 100 times before. The worst part wasn't that she entered. It was how comfortable she looked doing it. 5 minutes later, another car arrived. Then another. Then another. By 1 o'clock, my house had become HOA headquarters again. 23 people walked through my front door. Not one of them asked permission. Karen didn't act like a guest. She acted like the owner. She opened my kitchen cabinets, without hesitation. She already knew where everything was. Then, she reached for my coffee. My expensive coffee. The one I saved for quiet mornings by the lake. She laughed with the board members, poured drinks, passed around snacks, and welcomed everyone to my house. Then she said something that changed everything. I replayed that sentence 3 times. Not because I couldn't believe it, because I finally understood. This wasn't the first meeting. It wasn't even the 10th. Karen hadn't made one mistake. She'd built an entire routine inside my home. That's when I stopped thinking about changing the locks, and started planning something Karen Mitchell would remember for the rest of her life. Most people would have called a lawyer immediately. I did. His advice surprised me. Daniel, don't confront her again. Let her keep coming. Michael didn't care about Karen's excuses. He cared about proof. Real proof. Not opinions. Not arguments. Evidence. So, I stopped watching the cameras every hour. Instead, I archived everything. Every entry. Every exit. Every minute they spent inside my house. By the end of the second week, I had recorded over 30 hours of trespassing. 30 hours. Inside my own home. Karen wasn't hiding anymore. She'd become comfortable. Comfortable people make mistakes. She used my kitchen, my dining room, even my private office, like she owned every square foot. She knew my house better than some of my friends did. Then, I noticed something else. Someone new always attended the meetings. A quiet woman who rarely spoke. Unlike everyone else, she looked uncomfortable, almost guilty. Sometimes, the loudest truth comes from the quietest person. 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. She apologized before saying anything else. That was the moment I knew Karen's control was starting to crack. Karen told us the previous owner gave permanent permission. She never said the house had been sold. For the first time, someone inside the HOA was willing to tell the truth. I wasn't building a revenge case anymore. I was building a courtroom victory. And Karen Mitchell still had absolutely no idea. Susan wasn't the only one who had started asking questions. Once people realized the meetings inside my house weren't exactly legal, they began noticing things they'd ignored for years. Karen sensed it too. Her meetings became shorter. Her voice became louder. And every decision suddenly required absolute loyalty. Nobody discusses HOA business outside this room. Is that understood? That sentence told me everything. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was protecting herself. The next morning, I called a locksmith. Not to replace the locks. To answer one simple question. The locksmith examined the lock for less than 2 minutes, then quietly looked back at me. "This lock has been used by at least 2 different keys." I wasn't shocked. I was relieved. Now, I could prove it. The report joined everything else. Security footage, photos, visitor logs, time stamps. Every piece fit together, like a puzzle Karen had built herself. That afternoon, Michael called again. Karen still believes she'll never face consequences. Confidence is dangerous. Overconfidence is fatal. Karen had crossed that line weeks ago. That's when I stopped asking, how do I stop her? And started asking, how do I expose her? The answer was already sitting in my workshop, covered in dust. I stared at that welder for a very long time, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted them to finally understand what it felt like to lose control. The plan wasn't about hurting anyone, it was about stopping them long enough for the truth to arrive. My attorney approved every legal step. The fire marshal confirmed every emergency exit would remain accessible. Everything had to stay within the law. The following Tuesday, Karen scheduled another board meeting. Same house, same time, same confidence. She still believed the Lakehouse belonged to her. At 12:45, the first SUV rolled into my driveway, exactly on schedule. By 1 o'clock, 21 people had entered my home. Every camera was recording. Every second was evidence. Karen stood in my living room, welcoming everyone, like she owned the place. Karen Michelli waited, not across town, but quietly inside my workshop, watching every camera, live. 30 minutes passed. Coffee was poured. Budgets were discussed. Someone even laughed, inside my living room. That was the moment I picked up my welding helmet. I drove quietly toward the Lakehouse. Nobody noticed. Everyone was too busy, holding another meeting inside my home. The welding machine hummed softly. Blue sparks lit the afternoon air. And for the first time, Karen's meeting had no easy way out. The first weld wasn't meant to trap anyone. It was meant to stop Karen from pretending she could simply walk away when the truth arrived. Inside, the meeting continued. Karen was explaining next year's budget, completely unaware that her own future was changing outside. I checked every emergency exit one last time. Everything was exactly as planned. No danger, no panic, just accountability. Then, I made one final phone call. Unlike Karen, I invited law enforcement before the confrontation. Not after 8 minutes later, the first deputy arrived. Then another. Then county investigators. Karen finally noticed the flashing lights. Her smile disappeared instantly. Nobody answered. For the first time, the room felt different. The confidence was gone. Outside, I handed deputies everything. The property deed, the locksmith's report, 30 hours of surveillance footage, every timestamp, every recording. One deputy watched the footage, without saying a single word. When it ended, he simply looked at Karen. For the first time, Karen didn't have an answer. She looked toward the board members, hoping someone would defend her. Nobody did. Then, someone stepped forward. Susan Reyes. One confession became another, then another. Years of silence collapsed in minutes. Karen had controlled the meetings, but she couldn't control the evidence. By sunset, the investigation had become much bigger than one Lakehouse. Karen thought she was walking into another HOA meeting. Instead, she had walked directly into the beginning of the end. The investigation didn't end that afternoon. It had only begun. Within 48 hours, county investigators requested every HOA financial record from the past 5 years. Karen insisted everything was perfectly documented. The auditors disagreed. One missing payment became 3. 3 became 12. Then investigators discovered contracts that nobody could explain. The Lakehouse was never the real story. It was simply the mistake that exposed everything else. 2 months later, Karen walked into a courtroom. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one making the rules. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. I wanted one thing: accountability. The surveillance footage spoke first. Not me, not my attorney, the cameras. Then came the locksmith, then Susan, then the deputies. Every witness confirmed the same story. Karen's attorney argued that the meetings had always been allowed. Then the property deed appeared on the screen. The permission ended the day I bought the house. The courtroom became completely silent. There wasn't much left to argue. Several weeks later, the judgment arrived. Trespassing, unauthorized entry, civil damages. The HOA's insurance company refused to defend Karen's personal actions. She would face the consequences herself. With days, the HOA board called an emergency election. Not to celebrate, to survive. Karen resigned before the vote even began. No applause, no farewell speech. She simply walked away. The new HOA president asked if we could meet. This time, at the clubhouse. Not my house. Mr. Walker, "We're sorry. This should never have happened." They replaced the board, updated every policy, changed every lock, and ended decades of unwritten privileges. Sometimes people ask if welding that gate was worth it. They're asking the wrong question. The real turning point wasn't the welding. It was refusing to stay silent. Because bullies don't stop when people obey. They stop when people document everything. Today, my lake house is exactly what I hoped it would become. Quiet, peaceful, mine. Karen Mitchell lost a title. The HOA lost its empire. And I learned something far more valuable than revenge. The strongest door isn't made of steel. It's built with truth, patience, and the courage to stand your ground. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Property Revenge Files for more cinematic HOA revenge documentaries inspired by real property disputes.